And here we're picking up in Layout View. Now, Layout View is very similar to AutoCAD's Paperspace in that this is where we set up our drawings in order to be able to print things. Remember, you can toggle back and forth to your data view down here at the bottom of the screen. It allows you to go back into your data view where you're going to do most of your analysis work is in this space. But when we're ready to start preparing to export the data, we need to go ahead and move into this layout view or Paperspace environment. Now, if you don't have your layout tools available to you, you can go to Customize Toolbars and go and click on Layout, and this set of tools should go ahead and pop up. There's some important tools to know about here. One is to change the layout. I'm working today in a 12 by 18 inch in landscape view, so an architectural B drawing size. But when I'm doing most projects, I actually go ahead and scale up to something larger. And again, this comes back to resolution. The larger we export the data here, the higher the resolution typically that we have to work with when we're inside the Adobe environment. But just for this assignment, I'm going to go ahead and work at 12 by 18. Go ahead and finish that up. The other thing I should remind you about is the two different types of zoom, and I think this is one of those really confusing things that happens here in the layout space, is that one of those types of zooms is that you can still zoom within your data, within that data viewer, right? And so I can zoom in a bunch of times and change the scale at which my drawing is set up to view. Now, I can also go ahead and back out a couple of times because I had roughly the study area I was looking for somewhere in here. Now, I think I want to get a little bit tighter than that, something like this, and just really kind of looking to go from about Memorial Mall down to the Wabash River, somewhere in this range. Now, I can also use the pan tool and I can move around inside of that space. One other thing I can do if I'm missing just a little bit is I can also just go ahead and edit the frame, and that's going to actually, it's not going to change the scale, but it will change what's being shown. And so there's something just on the edge of my paper that I wanted to show and I just don't have it shown. Just go ahead and make a modification there and you'll be able to see that information. Now, before we go any further, one thing, there's a few other things you might want to go ahead and do. You can go to Insert and you can drop in north arrow, and so you can pick any of those north arrows and drop them in. It just becomes an object that we can go ahead and set into space here. I typically just go ahead and make sure it's clearly set somewhere within the drawing, because then I can go ahead and copy it out later. If I've got a good white boundary around it, I can draw a box around it in Photoshop and move it around later. The other thing I can do is I can go ahead and drop in a legend if I wanted. Right? In this particular case, I don't really need a legend because it's all basic information, but I'll just show you what that would look like if I went through that process. And you can edit within that menu as well. The final thing is you can add a scale bar, and so we'll talk more about this in other assignments, but a scale bar is always an important thing to know. This drawing is currently set up in miles. If I want to edit that, I can go to right click on it and go to properties, and I can change this over to feet so that my scale units are set up in a way that is consistent with how I want to display the information. And so then what I'll do is I'll tend to find kind of that works great for this particular project. And again, I'm going to drop it into some white space and then I can edit it out later in Photoshop. All right, that's about all I need to do to prep this image for exporting out. How we're going to do that is that we're actually going to use this would be really simple. I have 4 layers. I could just turn each of those layers on one at a time and I could export them out to Photoshop as individual layers, right? We've done this in previous assignments where we just go to File, Export Map. We tell it that we want to export it out as a TIFF. I export 4 TIFFs and away we go. The other approach to doing this that we've talked about before is to go ahead and export out the map into Adobe Illustrator. And there's one reason I'm going to show you why I'm doing it this way. I'm going to go into Adobe Illustrator. I actually already have one labeled that way, so I'll label it 2A. I can set my resolution here. Because I'm at that smaller 12 by 18 size, I'll keep it up at 200, but this is always a balancing game, is that where do you want to be in terms of total file size. You can get much too large, so if I were to go 24 by 36 and 300 dpi, I will overload what I can do and I'll have to downscale in Photoshop in order to work with the file. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and export my map out as into Adobe Illustrator. At this point in time, I can go ahead and close I can go ahead and close down GIS. We're done working in that environment. And really there's only one reason that I'm going into the Adobe Illustrator environment. And that reason is that I like kind of the pattern that we have here for all of the parcel boundaries right up until that point where I need an aerial photograph, right? Which actually is something that I forgot to do, so come back and catch that step. I'm going to need an aerial photograph, and the way to go ahead and do this is that I'm going to go ahead and add a base map, and I'm going to add imagery. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this, right? See, sometimes you work back and forth between all of these. Right now I have an aerial photograph. It's included in the layers. I think that's everything that I want to work with. I'm going to go ahead and export again one more time. I'm going to bring that in with an aerial photograph inside of it. We'll go ahead and save over the top of that one, right? And so then once that is finished up, we'll be able to go ahead and open that up in open it up here, and you'll see that I have all of the layers of information that I want. But in particular, there is one and really only one set of layers that I want to work with here in Adobe Illustrator. It's the reason I went this way. In addition to the speed of not having to separately export all of these, you can see that this gets to be quite a bit. And so again, if we want to go ahead and edit an object or a series of objects coming out of ArcGIS, we have to use we have to select, open up the clip group for the parcel layer. Go ahead and select the clipping path and then hit Control-Alt-G. And what that Control-Alt-G does is it unlocks my ability to delete the clipping path. I can now grab the clip group and I can go ahead and change up the lines. And in this case, I actually want to change the lines over to dashed lines. I think they look slightly better as dashed lines, and I think that that's a beneficial thing to do. The other thing that I can do at this point in time, if I want, is I could also do this in Photoshop, but I can go ahead and duplicate that layer. Let me go ahead and just turn those down. And again, I'm going to go ahead and grab that group. But in this case, I'm actually going to go ahead and change out the line work to white. And there's a reason for having both a black and a white version of line work. And that reason is pretty simple, is that when I turn on my aerial photograph, if I have the white line work, it's actually going to show up. Now, at this point I can check that and I can actually see that it's probably a little bit too thin to be really visible, and so I can go ahead and adjust the line weight here. Let's go up to 0.75 and see what that looks like, right? And that actually looks pretty good. It actually stands out really nicely against that, and so now I have the layers that I need. The final step for this video is that we're going to go ahead and do File, Export, and we're going to export as, and now we're headed off to Photoshop. And so the next video will pick up in Photoshop and kind of walk you through that process. Make sure that you write the layers. You don't want a flat image. You actually want to preserve all of your images. Keep the resolution up as you do your export. It will go ahead and kick this information out into a format that we can pick up in Photoshop and continue on with the rest of our exercise.